The banquet hall at the Grandview Country Club buzzed with conversation as Dad's colleagues, family, and friends gathered to celebrate his 40 years at Patterson Financial Group. 35 years of climbing the corporate ladder, 5 years as regional director, and now finally stepping down with full honors. The achievement everyone in our family had been working toward for decades. Everyone except me, apparently. I sat at the family table, nursing a club soda and watching Marcus work the room like he owned it. My older brother had always been the golden child. MBA from Wharton, senior vice president at Morrison Capital, married to Jennifer who came from old money, 2 kids in private school, house in the right neighborhood. Everything Dad had dreamed of when he'd started his own climb up the financial world's ladder. "There's my baby brother." Marcus's voice boomed across the table as he returned from his latest networking session. "Still nursing that soda? Come on, live a little. Dad's buying tonight." I smiled politely. "Someone has to drive." "Drive what?" "That 15-year-old Honda." He laughed and Jennifer giggled beside him. "Seriously, David, when are you going to get a real car? Or a real job for that matter?" The table had gone quiet. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Mom tried to change the subject by asking about the dessert menu. My sister Emma looked down at her plate, clearly embarrassed. "I like my Honda," I said calmly. "Gets good gas mileage." "Gas mileage?" Marcus shook his head in mock disbelief. "Ladies and gentlemen, my 30-year-old brother's biggest concern in life. Gas mileage." More laughter from his side of the table. The truth was, I could have bought a fleet of luxury cars without blinking. But the 2009 Honda Civic served my purposes perfectly. It was invisible, unremarkable, exactly the kind of car someone struggling to make ends meet would drive. Which is exactly what my family believed I was doing. For the past 8 years, ever since I'd dropped out of law school to pursue my own path, I'd carefully maintained the image of the family disappointment. The one who couldn't get his life together. The one who lived in a tiny studio apartment and worked odd jobs to pay the bills. The one who borrowed money from Mom occasionally and showed up to family events in thrift store clothes. What they didn't know was that I'd spent those 8 years building something extraordinary. It started with a simple observation during my brief time in law school. I'd noticed how inefficient the legal research process was, how lawyers spent hundreds of billable hours combing through case law that could theoretically be analyzed by artificial intelligence in minutes. So I'd quietly dropped out, liquidated my small trust fund and started building. Next-gen legal solutions began in my studio apartment with a server I'd assembled from used parts and code I'd written during countless sleepless nights. The first version was crude but functional, AI-powered legal research that could scan centuries of case law and identify relevant precedents in seconds rather than weeks. I'd started small, reaching out to solo practitioners and small firms who couldn't afford the big legal databases. $5 a search, $20 a month for unlimited access. Lawyers loved it because it made them more efficient. I loved it because every search taught my AI something new. Within 2 years, I'd quietly acquired 3 competitors and expanded into contract analysis, document review and regulatory compliance. The legal world was slow to adopt new technology, which gave me time to perfect my systems while staying completely under the radar. By year 4, I wasn't just disrupting legal research. I was revolutionizing it. Major law firms started licensing my technology through white-label partnerships. They didn't want to admit they were using AI developed by some unknown company, so they paid premium rates to rebrand my software as their own proprietary tools. That's when the real money started flowing. Year 6 brought my first billion-dollar acquisition, purchasing Westlaw's main competitor and integrating their database with my AI systems. The legal establishment finally started paying attention, but I'd structured everything through holding companies and offshore entities. To the outside world, Next-Gen Legal Solutions was just another mid-sized tech company that had gotten lucky with a few good contracts. To my family, I was still David the dropout who couldn't hold down a job. "Maybe it's time to think about going back to school," Dad said gently, trying to steer the conversation away from Marcus's increasingly pointed jabs. "There are some excellent MBA programs that accept." "Dad, he's 30 years old," Marcus interrupted. "At some point you have to accept that not everyone is cut out for success. Some people are just meant to be, what do you call it? Support staff." The microphone feedback screeched across the banquet hall as the evening's programming began. Dad's old boss, Robert Patterson himself, took the stage to deliver remarks about Dad's distinguished career. I listened with genuine pride as he described my father's contributions to the firm, his integrity, his dedication to his clients. Then came the family tribute portion of the evening. Before we continue, Patterson announced, I believe Marcus Williams has prepared some words about his father. My brother practically bounced to the stage, microphone in hand, every inch the polished executive. The spotlight hit him perfectly as he launched into what sounded like a prepared speech about Dad's legacy and the values he'd instilled in his children. My father taught us that success comes from hard work, dedication, and never giving up on your dreams, Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. He showed us that in America, anyone can build something meaningful if they're willing to make the sacrifices. Murmurs of approval from the audience. Dad beamed with pride. Now, I won't say it's been easy for all of us to live up to his example, Marcus continued, and I felt the shift in his tone. Some of us have found more success than others. A few chuckles from people who knew our family dynamics. But that's okay because Dad also taught us about compassion. About helping family members who might not be as fortunate. About supporting those who need a helping hand. The room was warming to his speech now. This was Marcus at his best. Charming, eloquent, seemingly generous while delivering devastating insults with a smile. In fact, I think it's beautiful how our family has rallied around my younger brother David during his, let's call them his challenging years. Still living off handouts at 30, but hey, he gestured toward my table with theatrical warmth. Family takes care of family, right? Laughter rippled through the crowd. Not cruel laughter exactly, but the kind of sympathetic chuckling that made it clear everyone knew I was the family disappointment. The charity case Marcus had painted me as. I sat perfectly still, hands folded in my lap, expression neutral. This was nothing new. I'd endured 8 years of family gatherings where I was the cautionary tale, the example of what happened when you didn't apply yourself. The brother who'd thrown away his potential and now needed everyone's patient tolerance. Still living off handouts? Marcus laughed directly into the microphone, his voice amplified across the entire banquet hall. I mean, we love him, but somebody's got to pay his rent, right? The laughter was louder now. I could see people at other tables turning to look at me with a mixture of pity and amusement. Dad's colleagues, his friends, his professional network, all getting a good chuckle at the expense of his failure son. That's when my phone rang. Not buzzed. Rang. Loudly enough that people at nearby tables could hear it over Marcus's continued commentary about family responsibility and supporting struggling relatives. I looked at the caller ID and felt something shift in my chest. Goldman Sachs. Private Wealth Management Division. The call I'd been expecting for 2 weeks. Sorry, I said quietly to my table, standing up. I should take this. Marcus paused his speech, microphone still in hand. Really, David? You're taking a call during Dad's retirement party? The disapproval in his voice carried clearly through the sound system. Heads turned throughout the banquet hall. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me as I answered the phone. David Chin speaking. Mr. Chin, this is Rebecca Morrison from Goldman Sachs Private Wealth Management. I apologize for calling so late, but we've just received final approval from our board of directors. Her voice was crisp, professional, and just loud enough that people at my table could hear fragments of the conversation. That's quite all right, I said calmly. Marcus was still standing at the podium, microphone in hand, clearly annoyed by the interruption. The room had gone quiet, waiting for me to finish my call so he could continue his speech. The acquisition has been approved at the full asking price, Rebecca continued. $4.2 billion as discussed. The wire transfer will be completed by market open on Monday. The words hung in the air. I wasn't sure if anyone else had heard clearly, but the number was large enough to draw attention. I see, I said, my voice level. And the transition timeline? 6 months for full integration as you requested. The legal teams will coordinate the regulatory filings next week. Congratulations, Mr. Chin. This is the largest legal technology acquisition in Goldman Sachs history. The banquet hall had gone completely quiet now. Marcus was staring at me from the podium, microphone still in his hand but forgotten. Dad's face had gone pale. Mom looked confused, like she wasn't sure what she was hearing. Thank you, Rebecca. Please send the final documentation to my office. Of course. And Mr. Chin? The board was particularly impressed by NextGen's AI integration capabilities. They're calling it a revolutionary approach to legal research and analysis. I thanked her and ended the call, slipping my phone back into my pocket. The silence in the banquet hall was deafening. 300 people staring at me, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Marcus was the first to recover. Did someone just say 4 billion? I nodded calmly. Goldman Sachs is acquiring my company, NextGen Legal Solutions. We've been negotiating for several months. Your company? Dad's voice was barely a whisper. I founded it 8 years ago, I said, still standing beside my chair. Right after I dropped out of law school. AI-powered legal research and analysis. We handle about 60% of all legal database searches in North America. The room erupted. Not in applause or celebration, but in the kind of shocked murmur that happens when people's fundamental assumptions about reality get shattered. I could hear fragments of conversation from nearby tables. Did he say billion? His company? 8 years. Marcus stood frozen at the podium, still holding the microphone. His face had gone through several color changes, settling on an alarming shade of red. $4.2 billion, I continued, addressing the room now since everyone was listening anyway. The deal closes Monday morning. After taxes and distribution to my employees, I'll personally net approximately $2.8 billion. Dad's retirement party had officially become something else entirely. I don't understand, Mom said, her voice shaky. We've been helping you with rent money. Your apartment is a corporate write-off, I explained gently. I've maintained a low profile for security reasons. Most successful tech founders become targets for everything from lawsuits to kidnapping attempts. It's safer to appear unremarkable. But the Honda, Jennifer whispered. Your clothes. You asked to borrow money for groceries last month. The Honda gets excellent gas mileage, as I mentioned. The clothes are comfortable. And I wanted to see if anyone in this family would help me when they thought I needed it. I looked around the table. Mom was the only one who ever offered without being asked. Emma was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. You've been pretending to be poor. For 8 years. I've been building something meaningful while avoiding the complications that come with visible wealth, I corrected. There's a difference. Marcus finally found his voice. This is impossible. You're telling me that you, my dropout brother who can't keep a job, built a billion-dollar company? While living in a studio apartment and driving a Honda. $4.2 billion company, I corrected. And yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. The murmur from the crowd was getting louder. People were pulling out phones, presumably to Google NextGen Legal Solutions. I had about 30 seconds before someone confirmed everything I'd just said. Marcus, I said, looking up at him still frozen at the podium. You mentioned handouts. He nodded numbly. I've never received a handout in my adult life. But since you brought it up. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. I noticed from Mom's comments over the years that you've borrowed approximately $87,000 from Dad and Mom since Jennifer lost her job. Would you like me to cover that debt? Call it a family gift. The color drained from his face entirely. Or perhaps you'd prefer I discuss the bridge loan you needed last year when Morrison Capital was investigating those discrepancies in your client accounts? David, Dad said sharply. That's enough. Is it? I looked around the table. Because I've spent 8 years listening to commentary about my failures, my lack of ambition, my need for handouts. I've been called a disappointment, an embarrassment, a waste of potential. Tonight, in front of 300 people, I was publicly mocked as someone who lives off handouts and needs the family's charity. I stood up and walked toward the stage. Hey, I asked Marcus, gesturing to the microphone. He handed it over without a word, stepping back like I might be contagious. Good evening, everyone, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. I apologize for the disruption. As some of you may have overheard, I just received confirmation that Goldman Sachs is acquiring my company, NextGen Legal Solutions, for $4.2 billion. The crowd had gone completely silent. For those who don't know me, I'm David Chin, Robert's younger son. The one who dropped out of law school to pursue his own path. The family disappointment who couldn't get his life together. A few uncomfortable chuckles from people who recognized the irony.
I founded NextGen 8 years ago with a simple goal: revolutionize how legal professionals access and analyze information. Today, Our AI systems process more than 2 million legal queries daily for law firms across 6 continents. We've eliminated millions of hours of redundant research, democratized access to legal databases, and fundamentally changed how attorneys serve their clients. I could see people frantically typing on their phones now, searching for information about my company. The acquisition by Goldman Sachs represents the largest legal technology deal in history. It will create thousands of jobs, accelerate AI development across multiple industries, and establish new standards for how professional services integrate technology. I paused, looking out at the crowd of Dad's colleagues and friends. I share this not to boast, but to make a point about assumptions. For 8 years, I've allowed my family and friends to believe I was unsuccessful because it served my purposes. It allowed me to work without distractions, build without interference, and focus entirely on creating something meaningful. But I want to be clear about something. I looked directly at Marcus. I have never, in my adult life, received handouts from anyone. I have never been a charity case. And I have never been an embarrassment to this family. The applause started slowly from a table near the back and built gradually until the entire banquet hall was clapping. Not for me specifically, but for the story, for the surprise, for the sheer audacity of what they just witnessed. I handed the microphone back to Marcus and walked back to my table. Dad was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not pride, exactly, but something closer to awe. $4 billion, he said quietly. 4.2 billion, I corrected. But yes. And you never told us. Would you have believed me? He considered this for a long moment, then shook his head. Probably not. Mom reached over and took my hand. I'm so sorry, honey. We never knew. You weren't supposed to know. That was the whole point. But we treated you like someone who needed help. And sometimes I did need help. Just not the kind you thought. Marcus had returned to his seat, looking like he'd been hit by a truck. Jennifer kept staring at me like I might be an imposter. Emma was the first to speak. So what happens now? Now. I smiled. Now I go back to my studio apartment and my Honda Civic and continue living exactly the same way I have for 8 years. Except on Monday morning, I'll also be worth approximately $2.8 billion. That's insane, Emma said. That's practical. Wealth changes people, and not usually for the better. I've spent 8 years watching this family's dynamics, seeing how money and status affect relationships. I'm not interested in becoming someone I don't recognize. But you could buy anything, Jennifer said. A mansion, cars, boats. You could travel anywhere, do anything. I could, I agreed. But I like my life. I like my work. I like being underestimated. It gives me advantages that money can't buy. Dad was still processing. Your company. You said it handles 60% of legal searches. Approximately. We're the invisible infrastructure behind most legal research in North America. Law firms license our technology, rebrand it, and present it as their own proprietary systems. Their clients never know they're using our AI. That's brilliant, he said softly. It's practical. Direct consumer marketing in legal services is expensive and complicated. White label licensing generates the same revenue with a fraction of the overhead. Marcus finally found his voice. I need to apologize. No, I said firmly. You don't. But I called you. You called me exactly what I wanted you to call me. Everything you've said about me over the years has been perfectly reasonable based on the information you had. But I was cruel. You were honest. There's a difference. I looked around the table at my family. I'm not angry about tonight or any other night. I needed you to believe I was struggling because it allowed me to build something extraordinary without interference. Your assumptions about my failures were essential to my success. Emma shook her head. That's incredibly manipulative. It's strategic, I corrected, and effective. The banquet hall was slowly returning to normal conversation levels, though I could see people at other tables still stealing glances in our direction. Someone had clearly confirmed my story online because phones were being passed around with what I assumed were articles about next-gen legal solutions. So what's next? Dad asked. After the acquisition, what are your plans? I'll stay on as Chief Technology Officer for 2 years to ensure smooth integration. After that, I shrugged. I'll probably start something new. I like building things. Another tech company? Maybe. Or something completely different. With this kind of capital, I can explore ideas that wouldn't be financially viable otherwise. Marcus was staring down at his hands. I feel like an idiot. Don't. You accomplished exactly what you set out to accomplish. You built a successful career, provided for your family, made Dad proud. The fact that I took a different path doesn't diminish your achievements. But I spent years lecturing you about responsibility and success while you were quietly building an empire. Were your lectures wrong? Should people be irresponsible? Should they not strive for success? That's not the point. It's exactly the point. Your advice was good advice. I just happened to be following it in ways you couldn't see. The evening wound down with a strange energy. Dad's colleagues approached our table throughout the night, offering congratulations and business cards. Several mentioned opportunities for collaboration or investment. I politely accepted their cards and promised to be in touch. As people began leaving, Patterson himself approached our table. David, he said, extending his hand. Congratulations on your success. That's quite an achievement. Thank you, Mr. Patterson. I have to ask, why the secrecy? Why not share your success with your family? Privacy mostly. Once people know you have money, every interaction becomes colored by that knowledge. I wanted to maintain authentic relationships as long as possible. And now I'll adapt. People will treat me differently, and I'll learn to navigate that. But I got 8 years of authentic relationships first. He nodded thoughtfully. Smart approach. I wish more young entrepreneurs understood that principle. After he walked away, Dad stood up. I think I need some air. David, would you join me? We stepped outside onto the country club's patio, overlooking the golf course under a clear night sky. I owe you an apology, Dad said after a few moments of silence. For what? For doubting you. For worrying about you. For letting Marcus treat you the way he did. Dad, everything you did was reasonable. I gave you every reason to worry about me. But you were building something extraordinary, and I couldn't see it. Because I didn't want you to see it. That was the whole point. He was quiet for a long time. $4.2 billion. Yes. From legal research software. From solving a problem that millions of professionals face every day. The money is just a metric of how valuable that solution turned out to be. And you did it all by yourself. I did it with a team of brilliant engineers and researchers, but yes, I built the company from nothing. In 8 years. 8 years of 18-hour days, 7 days a week. 8 years of learning everything I could about artificial intelligence, legal databases, business development, corporate strategy. 8 years of making mistakes and fixing them and making new mistakes. While we thought you were failing. While you thought I was failing. Which gave me the space to work without pressure or interference or unsolicited advice. He turned to look at me. Do you resent us? For not believing in you. Dad, if you had believed in me, everything would have been different. You would have wanted to help, to offer advice, to introduce me to people in your network. Mom would have worried about whether I was eating enough or sleeping enough or working too hard. Marcus would have wanted to collaborate or compete or compare achievements. And that would have been bad? That would have been distracting. I needed to focus completely on building something that had never been built before. I needed to fail and learn and iterate without explaining myself to anyone. So you let us think the worst. I let you think what you thought. I never lied about my work or my finances. I just didn't correct your assumptions. We stood in silence for several more minutes. I'm proud of you, Dad said finally. I know. And I'm sorry it took learning about the money for me to say it. Dad, I've been proud of you my entire life. Tonight was supposed to be about celebrating your achievements, not mine. Tonight was supposed to be about celebrating a man who taught his son that success comes from hard work and never giving up on your dreams. I'd say that mission was accomplished. We walked back inside to rejoin the family. The party was winding down, people saying their goodbyes and heading home. Marcus and Jennifer were deep in conversation with Emma about something that looked serious. Ready to go? Mom asked as we approached the table. Actually, I said, I think I'll stick around for a while. Help Dad say goodbye to people. You sure? It's getting late. I'm sure. As the family gathered their things to leave, Marcus approached me one more time. David, I really do need to apologize. Not just for tonight, but for everything. Years of treating you like you weren't good enough. Marcus, you treated me exactly like a successful older brother should treat a younger brother who appeared to be wasting his potential. Your concern came from a good place. But I was wrong. You were working with incomplete information. There's a difference. He extended his hand. Congratulations on your success. I shook it. Congratulations on yours. After they left, I helped Dad thank the remaining guests and say goodbye to his colleagues. People were still approaching me with business opportunities and investment ideas, but I handled each conversation politely and briefly. Finally, it was just Dad and me, sitting at our table in the nearly empty banquet hall. So what really happens now? He asked. Now I drive home to my studio apartment in my Honda Civic and go to sleep. Tomorrow I'll work on integration planning for the Goldman Sachs transition. Monday, I'll become one of the wealthiest people in the country. And through it all, I'll try to remain the same person I've always been. That might be harder than you think. Probably. But I've had 8 years to prepare for this moment. I've watched how wealth changes people, how success changes relationships. I've made my decisions about the kind of person I want to be. And what kind of person is that? I smiled. The kind who drives a Honda Civic and thinks gas mileage is important. Dad laughed, and for the first time in years, it felt like we were just father and son, talking about life and dreams and the future. No assumptions, no disappointments, no charity cases. Just family. As I drove home that night in my 15-year-old Honda, I thought about the look on Marcus's face when he heard the Goldman Sachs call. The shock, the disbelief, the gradual recognition that everything he'd assumed about me was wrong. Tomorrow, the story would spread through Dad's professional network, then beyond. By Monday, when the acquisition was officially announced, I'd become a public figure whether I wanted to or not. The invisible phase of my career was ending. But tonight I was still just David, the family disappointment who'd surprised everyone by building something extraordinary while they weren't looking. The charity case who'd just sold his company for $4.2 billion. I smiled as I pulled into my modest apartment complex, already thinking about what I'd build next.